There is a question that every U.S. Navy admiral wakes up to in the year 2026, and it is not the question about Iran. It is not the question about China. It is the question that has no clean answer. What happens when it is both at exactly the same time? On May 6, 2026, in a conference room inside the Diaoyu Thai State Guest House in Beijing, Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi sat across from Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi and said 11 words that the U.S. National Security Council would spend the next 72 hours parsing at crisis level. He said, "Iran adheres to the One China principle and supports China in safeguarding its core interests." Wang Yi, according to the official Chinese readout, expressed that Beijing supports Iran in safeguarding its national sovereignty and security. Two foreign ministers, a handshake, a photograph released by state media, and buried in the diplomatic boilerplate, a mutual security guarantee that crossed every red line the U.S. intelligence community had been watching for since February 28th. What the cameras did not capture was the second conversation, the one that happened 30 minutes later in a smaller room without note-takers from the foreign ministries, the one that the NSA SIGINT station at RAF Menwith Hill would partially reconstruct over the following 18 hours from metadata pattern analysis and a single intercepted courier communication, the one that outlined a strategic window, 8 days beginning May 13th, during which both powers would execute coordinated pressure operations designed to split the attention of the United States Navy across two oceans simultaneously. The window was not a coincidence. It was the week of the Trump-Xi summit in Beijing, when the White House's full diplomatic bandwidth would be absorbed by trade negotiations, when a military response from Washington would carry maximum political cost, and when the American public, exhausted with 67 days of Iran war coverage, would struggle to process two crises on opposite sides of the world at the same time. Washington saw the meeting. Washington read the readout. Washington chose to call it diplomacy. That was the first mistake. May 13th, D-Day -1. At 23:18 hours local time, a PLA Eastern Theater Command operations officer transmitted a single encrypted burst to the planned Type 055 destroyer Zunyi, operating in waters 140 nautical miles east of Luzon, alongside a battle group that had been publicly described as a routine naval exercise in response to the US-Philippines Balikatan 2026 drills. The burst lasted 0.3 seconds. The NSA station in Misawa, Japan captured it, flagged it at the lowest priority level, and queued it for processing. It would not be decrypted until 3 hours after the attack had already begun. Simultaneously, in the Strait of Hormuz, the IRGC Navy Coastal Defense Command at Bandar Abbas received its own activation signal. 23 fast attack craft, idle since the pause of Project Freedom on May 6th, began warming their engines. 4 Fateh-class submarines, small, quiet, and capable of operating in the shallow waters of the Gulf with terrifying effectiveness, went to battle stations and began their outbound transit under the acoustic cover of the commercial shipping that had cautiously returned to the strait in the preceding week. At the Shahid Noja Air Base, 300 miles north, 2 wings of Iranian Su-35SK aircraft acquired from Russia in the months before the war were fueled and armed with Kh-31A anti-radiation missiles specifically calibrated to home on the radar signature of an AN-Spy-1D phased array system, the radar of an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer.
Theater 1, Hormuz. USS Nitze DDG-94 leading Project Freedom Convoy Alpha. 3 escorts, 6 commercial vessels, 127 civilian crew at risk. Iranian Fast Attack Force, 23 PACOP craft plus 4 Fateh submarines converging. Theater 2, Taiwan Strait. USS Ronald Reagan Strike Group. 2 destroyers, 1 cruiser, 90 aircraft, 280 nautical miles east of Taiwan. PLN Battle Group Zunyi, Type 055, 2 Type 052D, 1 Type 093 submarine, closing at 28 knots. May 14, 0241 local, in Hormuz. The trigger in the Strait of Hormuz was not a missile. It was a merchant ship, the MV Seagrace Venture, a Maltese-flagged LNG tanker that had transited the strait 3 hours earlier under U.S. Navy escort, broadcast a distress signal at 0241, indicating a catastrophic engine room fire. The USS Nitsy, convoy lead, reduced speed and turned toward the vessel. The fire was real. The limpet mine that had caused it, attached to the hull during the Seagrace's last port call in Fujairah, had been triggered by an IRGC handler ashore on a preset timer, not in response to any order. It was an alarm clock, not a weapon. Its purpose was not to sink the tanker. Its purpose was to stop the convoy for 11 minutes while the fast attack force completed its final approach geometry. The Seahawk crew from HSM 46 saw them first. Surface contacts, bearing 260, multiple tracks, speed 30 knots, closing. Then, revising, 20-plus contacts, confirm hostile posture. The AN-SPS-73V12 navigation radar on the Nitsy's bridge had already painted 17 of the contacts before the Seahawk called the first one. At the same time, and this was the innovation, this was what the IRGC had spent the previous 6 weeks rehearsing, the 4 Fateh submarines opened their outer torpedo tube doors in a staggered sequence, not simultaneously, 4 minutes apart, so that the Nitsy's towed array sonar would receive a continuous stream of tube-opening transients, each one demanding an immediate classification decision, each one pulling CIC attention away from the surface picture, each one compressing the cognitive bandwidth of a combat information center that was already running at 100%. It was not brute force, it was cognitive overload as a weapon system. May 14, 0244 local, Taiwan Strait, 3 minutes later. 3,200 miles to the east-northeast, the PLN Type 055 Zunyi executed a hard turn to port and broke from its exercise formation at 31 knots, directly toward the USS Ronald Reagan strike group, operating in international waters 280 nautical miles east of Taiwan. Simultaneously, PLA rocket force units at 3 separate bases on the Fujian coast activated their targeting radars, not the DF-21D carrier-killer ballistic missiles. Those remained in their silos. What activated was something more surgical. 16 YJ-12B supersonic anti-ship cruise missiles on mobile launchers in the mountains above Xiamen, their seekers preloaded with the radar cross-section profile of a Nimitz Ford-class carrier. The targeting sequence required a radar fire control radar to paint the Reagan for 8.4 seconds to complete the terminal guidance uplink. The first radar illuminated at 0244.12. The USS Ronald Reagan's AN/SLQ-32V5 Sea Whip screamed the alert across the ship in the same instant. In the Reagan's Combat Direction Center, the watch officer had 3 simultaneous red symbols on his tactical picture: the Zunyi battle group closing from the west, the rocket force fire control radar from the northwest, and a third contact that had not been there 30 seconds earlier, a PLN Type 093B nuclear attack submarine that had spent the last 11 days lying motionless on a seamount at 400 meters depth, waiting. It had not been detected until it moved, and it had moved because it was told to. The Reagan's commanding officer, Captain Meredith Owens, had been in command for 14 months. She had trained for 2 front scenarios in the Naval War College simulator at Newport. She had never trained for a scenario where both fronts activated within 3 minutes of each other, with her strike group as one axis and a completely separate combat action in a different ocean as the second, because no one had trained for that. It had been assessed as too low probability to model. The assessment had been wrong. The brilliance of the Beijing arrangement, if brilliance is the right word for something this dangerous, was that it did not require Iran and China to fire the same weapon. It required them to fire at the same time. The result was a U.S. defense apparatus that was not outgunned, it was outclocked. 0249 local, Hormuz, 8 minutes in. Back in the Strait of Hormuz, the picture had clarified into something that could only be described as controlled catastrophe. The USS Nitze's Mk-15 Phalanx had destroyed 5 fast attack craft in the preceding 4 minutes. The 2 MH-60R Seahawks had killed 3 more with AGM-114 Hellfire missiles. But the IRGC had launched a second wave. 14 additional PACOP craft from a holding position inside Iranian territorial waters. And the convoy's defensive geometry was deteriorating. One Iranian boat had closed to within 300 meters of the commercial vessel MV Nordic Carrier before the Phalanx destroyed it, the shrapnel from the exploding hull raking the tanker's superstructure and wounding 4 crew members. One of the Fateh submarines had launched a torpedo. It had been detected, classified, and engaged by a prosecuting Seahawk, but the prosecution took the helicopter entirely out of the surface picture for 6 minutes. 6 minutes in a Hormuz swarm engagement is not a tactical pause, it is a lifetime. At 0249, the Nitze's commanding officer requested immediate air support from the USS Gerald R. Ford Strike Group in the Gulf of Oman. The Ford's Air Ops officer began spinning up a 4-ship FA-18E package, 12 minutes to weapons release. And then 5th Fleet received the Link 16 data from the Pacific, the Reagan situation, and the Ford's admiral faced a question that no operations order had prepared him for. His EA-18G Growlers, his E-2D Hawkeyes, his strike package, all of it was committed to the Hormuz engagement. None of it could reach the Taiwan Strait in under 6 hours. The U.S. Navy at that moment was fighting one war with the left hand while the right hand was empty. 0251 local, Taiwan Strait, 10 minutes in. Captain Owens on the Reagan made the call that U.S. Pacific Fleet would later describe in classified language as the correct decision under impossible conditions. She ordered the strike group to sprint east at flank speed, 30 knots, away from the rocket force radar coverage arc, while simultaneously launching a 4-ship FA-18F package with AGM-888 HARM anti-radiation missiles against the Fujian rocket force fire control radars. The AGM-888s did not need to destroy the launchers. They needed to force the radar operators to shut down, breaking the targeting chain before the YJ-12Bs could complete their terminal guidance uplink. It worked for 2 of the 3 radar sites. The 3rd site went to passive mode, ceasing to emit but continuing to track the carrier optically via its integrated EO/IR system. The YJ-12B missiles from that site were now running on autonomous terminal guidance.
11 YJ-12B missiles were in the air, each one traveling at Mach 2.5, sea-skimming with an active radar seeker that could not be jammed once it had achieved terminal lock. The Reagan's Aegis system on the escorting USS Antietam and USS Wayne E. Meyer went to maximum engagement rate. SM-6 missiles erupted from VLS cells in streams of white fire. The CIWS systems on both destroyers and the carrier herself spun up. The electronic warfare package from the Reagan's Air Wing, 2 EA-18Gs that had been airborne on a routine CAP cycle, turned to the threat and opened their jamming pods at full power. Of the 11 missiles, 9 were destroyed. One was spoofed by an ALE-55 fiber optic tow decoy launched from one of the Growlers, detonating harmlessly 2 kilometers astern of the Reagan. One was not. The final YJ-12B,
Its seeker locked onto the largest radar cross-section in the Pacific Ocean, detonated its 205-kilogram warhead against the Ronald Reagan's port-side aircraft elevator at 0256 local. The blast killed 19 sailors. It destroyed 2 FA-18F aircraft on the elevator deck. It put the port elevator out of commission. It did not sink the carrier. It was not designed to sink the carrier. It was designed to demonstrate that it could. In the Strait of Hormuz, the IRGC fast attack swarm was broken by 0318. 11 fast attack craft destroyed, 2 Fateh submarines driven to the surface under MH-60 prosecution. The Su-35SK package turned back by a wall of AIM-120D AMRAAM launched by Ford Air Wing fighters that arrived 12 minutes late but no less lethal. Project Freedom Convoy Alpha completed its transit into the Gulf of Oman at 0401. 4 crew members wounded, 1 tanker damaged but afloat. By conventional measure, the United States Navy had won both engagements. It had defeated the swarm. It had defeated 11 of 11 missiles. No, 10 of 11. That one. That single YJ-12B. And it was that one that mattered. Not because of the damage. 19 dead, 1 elevator. Grievous, yes. Fatal to the ship? No. It mattered because of what it proved at 0256 on the morning of May 14, 2026, on the day of the Trump-Xi summit, with the world watching, that China could hit a U.S. aircraft carrier. That the deterrent, the 70-year assumption that no power would dare strike an American flat top, had been tested and had not held perfectly. 1 missile got through. And in the calculus of great power deterrence, 1 is infinity. The summit continued. Both sides called it productive. Iran announced it was reviewing the ceasefire terms. The Strait of Hormuz partially reopened 4 days later. The Ronald Reagan was repaired and operational within 6 weeks. The 19 sailors were buried with full honors. None of this was on the front page by the end of the month, but in the classified after-action reviews filed at Pearl Harbor, at 5th Fleet Headquarters in Bahrain, and at the Pentagon's Joint Staff, a single sentence appeared in every document. We were not prepared to fight both simultaneously. We must be. Go back to that photograph. Wang Yi and Araghchi shaking hands in the Diao Tai State Guest House on May 6, 2026. 2 foreign ministers. A scheduled diplomatic meeting, announced publicly, reported on by every major wire service. A readout that contained nothing that any analyst flagged as operationally significant. And buried inside it, in boilerplate language about comprehensive strategic partnership and mutual support for core interests, the outline of the most consequential military coordination since the Korean War. It did not require a secret treaty. It did not require encrypted operational orders that could be intercepted and decoded. It required 2 diplomats to say, in the language of statesmen, you do yours, we'll do ours, and we'll do it at the same time. The lesson of the two-ocean crisis is not about missiles. It is not about fast attack boats or submarine acoustics or electronic warfare jamming. It is about the gap between what intelligence services collect and what decision-makers process during a week when everyone's attention is on a summit and a handshake and trade percentages. Tehran and Beijing understood something about American strategic bandwidth that Washington had spent years refusing to model, that the most powerful military on Earth can be defeated, not destroyed, but defeated, not destroyed, but checked, not by matching its strength, but by simultaneously demanding it in 2 places at once at the exact moment its commander-in-chief is sitting at a negotiating table in Beijing trying to close a deal. 19 sailors, 1 elevator, 1 missile through, and a question that every admiral, every Pacific Fleet commander, every 5th Fleet commander now lives with when they wake up at 0300 and stare at the ceiling. Not, can we win a war with Iran? Not, can we win a war with China? The question is, can we fight both at exactly the same time and win both with the forces we have right now, tonight? If you believe the answer is yes, comment 1 below. If you believe that the events of May 14, 2026 revealed a gap that America's adversaries will attempt to exploit again, comment 2. Stay sharp, stay informed, and remember this: the most dangerous weapon in the arsenal of any adversary is not the missile that gets through your defenses. It is the meeting you didn't think to classify.